Hello. So the place I've come to read today, I was trying to find a spot far off, but kind of just on the outskirt of the city here. And every place I chose to walk into that kind of looked like a little path, I did notice moose tracks for one, and also I'm not sure what kind of track this is, but it looks like it has 3 large toes, or maybe it's the moose's footprints just close together. They stepped in the same spot twice, maybe. That's what that is. And they must walk off through here because it kind of, you can see a path kind of going through there. But anyway, yeah, just thought that was kind of cool. So I did manage to find a tree with some shade. Lucky me. Try to set up my camera here in some kind of way. Let's see. Tip that up a bit maybe. There we go. That's all right. All right, not sure what this spot is going to be like because people ride their trikes up through here out this way. But here we are. At Chapter 3, Forestry, Ban Forests or Royal Forests, Early Forestry, the Moon's Influence, Ancient Foresters, and Forest Customs. So I was going to continue to upload some AI versions of this with like the pages and an AI voice reading it, but I honestly found that way too boring, and I decided to just continue with just reading the book out in random places. So, yeah, here I go. Although the words forest and forestry are now generally understood to be connected with trees, yet the former does not necessarily mean wooded ground or natural woodland, but has been considered to have been derived from the Latin foris, meaning out of doors, and thus the unenclosed open land. Dr. Wedgwood, however, considered it to be a modified form of the Welsh gorest, waste or waste ground, whence the English word gorse. Whin or furs was derived as being the product of wasteland. In the early Norman Plantagenet and Tudor days, the word had a much wider and more significant meaning, and as many of these wastes were clothed with trees and undergrowth, the word forest was in course of time applied to a great wood. Marwood, in his Laws of the Forest, 1598, described a forest as a certain territory of woody grounds and fruitful pastures, privileged for wild beasts and fowls of forest, chase and warren, to rest and abide in the safe protection of the king for his princely delight and pleasure. Another definition speaks of a forest as extensive wastelands, which include a certain amount of woodland and pasture within which the right of hunting was exclusively reserved for the king, and which was subject to a special code of laws. The ancients, on the other hand, called a large tract of country covered with trees a silva, from whence is derived the word silviculture. In the Middle Ages, the emperors of Germany and other royal personages were the first to enclose large tracts of land in which they preserved deer and other game for the purpose of hunting. They made many forest laws concerning boundaries, pasturage, right to feeding swine en masse, damage done to trees, etc. These tracts were known as ban forests. King James I of England was the first who enclosed a part of Windsor Forest, and he incurred much obloquy thereby. These band forests, or royal forests of the Middle Ages, seem to have been originally heath and groves, over which the king eventually asserted a right and withdrew the holy wood from use by the people. Gibbon says, the royal forests were reserved for the more important purposes of the chase, and the trees, says Nicetas, were guarded by the eunuchs like the groves of religious worship. In Alsace, a royal band forest existed at Driesch from the heathen worship of 3 oaks for a very long period, and its charter was one of the most primitive. Prescott, speaking for the forests of Mexico, mentioned a tale of one of the ancient kings of Tezcuco, Nezahualcoyotl, by name, who reigned in the 15th century. He says, it was common for him to ramble among his subjects in disguise, like the celebrated Caliph in the Arabian Nights, mingling freely in conversation and ascertaining their actual condition with his own eyes. On one such occasion, when attended only by a single lord, he met with a boy who was gathering sticks in a field for fuel. He inquired of him, why did he not go into the neighboring forest, where he would find a plenty of them? To which the lad answered, it was the king's wood, and he would punish him with death if he trespassed there. The royal forests were very extensive in Tezcuco, and were guarded by laws full as severe as those of the Norman tyrants in England. What kind of man is your king? Asked the monarch, willing to learn the effect of these prohibitions on his own popularity. A very hard man, answered the boy, who denies his people what God has given them. This man urged him not to mind such arbitrary laws, but to glean his sticks in the forest, as there was no one present who would betray him. But the boy sturdily refused, bluntly accusing the disguised king at the same time of being a traitor, and wishing to bring him into trouble. The end was that the king sent for the boy and his parents, commended the former for his respect for the laws, and praised the parents for their praiseworthy upbringing of their son. He also mitigated the severity of the forest laws so as to allow persons to gather any wood they might find on the ground, if they did not meddle with the standing timber. The forests of the primeval world consisted of many varieties of trees and shrubs, and when the older plants reached their limit of life, they disappeared, others taking their place. This natural regeneration of the forests went on uninterruptedly for untold ages, until at length mankind appeared, and by his interference the areas under trees became considerably reduced, with accompanying alterations in the climate of the various countries and in the productiveness of their soil. Humboldt said that by felling the forests on the sides of the mountains, men in every climate prepared 2 calamities for future generations, these being want of fuel and scarcity of water. Trees, he says, by the radiation from their leaves in a cloudless sky, surround themselves with a cold and misty atmosphere, as they shelter the soil from the direct action of the sun. Evaporation is checked, and the water collects to form copious springs. On the other hand, when forests are destroyed, the undergrowths of grass and moss vanish also, with the result that the water produced by heavy rains has an unimpeded course down the hillsides, and torrents and inundations are the natural sequence. The earliest recorded instance of forestry operations in which trees were transplanted to a foreign land is found in the records of an Egyptian expedition to the land of Punt, now known as Somaliland, during the reign of Queen Hatassu of the 18th dynasty. The object of this expedition seems to have been to explore the lands from which incense was brought, and the history of the expedition was depicted on the walls of the Temple of Hathor at Deir el-Bahari, It reads, "Laden was the cargo to the uttermost with all the wonderful products of the land of Punt, and with the different nut woods of the divine land, and with heaps of the resin of incense, with fresh incense trees, with ebony, and so on. It is said that 31 of these incense trees, well packed in tubs, were drawn on board the vessels, and that it took 6 men to drag one of the tubs." An inscription of a later date, 1200 BC, records how Ramses III of the 20th dynasty says, "I have planted trees and shrubs to the end that the people should sit under their shade." In ancient days, the state of the moon, whether it was waxing or waning, was considered to be of great importance in connection with the felling of timber. Pliny, borrowing from Theophrastus, says that the very best time to cut down trees is when the moon is in conjunction with the sun, that day being called the interlineum, or sometimes the moon's silence. He says that Tiberius Caesar took advantage of that belief to fell the larches in Raetia, which he required to rebuild the bridges of the Naumachia, which had been destroyed by fire. Cutting the trees at the time of the rising of the Dog Star was also said to be favorable, and the timber used for building the Forum of Augustus was cut at that time. Cato gives instructions regarding timber as follows. "When you root up the elm, the pine, the nut tree, or indeed any other kind of tree, mind and do so when the moon is on the wane, after midday, and when there is no south wind blowing." The proper time for cutting a tree is when the seed is ripe, but be careful not to draw it away or plane it when the dew is falling. He then proceeds to say, "Never touch the timber except when the moon is on the change, or else at the end of the second quarter. As these periods you may either root up the tree or fell it as it stands. The next 7 days after the full moon are the best of all for the grubbing up of a tree. Be particularly careful not to rough hew timber or indeed to cut or touch it, unless it is perfectly dry, and by no means while it is covered with frost or dew. Even in comparatively recent times, the wane of the moon, or when it is wattle, was considered to be the best time for tree felling. The underlying idea seemed to be that as the moon grew less in the sky, so the amount of sap in the wood decreased or flowed downwards, leaving the wood drier, much in the same manner as the waters of the ocean are affected as seen in the tides. Jacob Grimm mentions that in a calendar printed by Hupp Fuff, Strasbourg, 1511, appears the following: "With the moon's weddle 'tis good to begin the hewing of wood," and he adds that the same precept is still given in many modern forest books, and full moon is therefore called Hull's wattle. In the bad wattle, crescent moon, fell no timber. Thus, in early times, carpenters rejected wood which had been cut when the moon was waxing, alleging that at that time it was full of moisture. The forest laws of France had formerly a regulation that trees must only be felled when the moon was on the wane, and even yet in some parts the opinion is held that wood cut soon after new moon will not dry. In some parts of the world, however, the opposite is said to be the case. Thus some tribes in East Africa use posts for their hut building, which had been cut while the moon was waxing, as they considered them very durable, and some German foresters hold the same opinion. Yeah, I have the phone here hanging from a tree, so it's going to sway with the breeze, which I think is kind of nice. Back to the book. It is said that in Demerara there is a tree resembling mahogany called Walala, which is much influenced by the phases of the moon. If the tree be cut down at new moon, the wood is tough and very difficult to split, but if the moon is full at the time, the wood is soft and splits very easily. The first forester of whom there is any authentic notice was one Uni or Una, an Egyptian, whose name appears in the inscription on his tomb. This is one of the most ancient historical texts known and was discovered by Mariette in the necropolis of Abydos. It takes us back to about the year 3500 BC, and Uni was forester or inspector of the woods of the royal domain to King Pepi or the Pharaoh Teta. The woods of which he had charge were probably lands with plantations of palms or acacias, the thinly wooded forests of Egypt, and also of the vines which belonged to the personal domain of the pharaoh. Let's turn this a little bit. Oops. Hang on a second here. Yeah, I like that better. Okay. So let's see. Much later, and in another country, another forester named Asaph is mentioned. Nehemiah, when about to rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, obtained letters from Artaxerxes, the king, and a letter unto Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the palace, which appertain to the house, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall enter into. And the king granted me according to the good hand of my God upon me. In the ancient Assyrian inscriptions is found the text of the legend of the infancy of Sargina the First, king of Agani, who reigned about the 15th or 16th century BC. The king tells how he was born in a secret place, and his mother placed him in an ark of bulrushes, well sealed with bitumen, and then threw him into the river Euphrates. The river bore him along on its stream to the dwelling of Aki, the water carrier, who rescued him and brought him up as his own son. Afterwards he placed him among a tribe of foresters or woodmen, and the goddess Ishtar made him the chief or king over them. The record, being partly obliterated, does not specify how many years he reigned over this tribe. This tale bears a close resemblance to that of Moses being found among the bulrushes, and probably both had the same origin, the latter being likely a later adaptation. Death has been symbolically regarded as a forester, and has been called Holzmeier or wood mower by Kaiserberg. In a folio written in 1521 called De Arbor Humana, he says, "Wherein easily and to the glory of God ye may learn to await blithely the woodcutter Death." And again, "So is Death called a village mower or wood mower, and justly hath he the name, for he hath in him the properties of a woodcutter, as, please God, ye shall hear. The first property of the village mower is communitas, he being possessed in common by all such as be in the village, and being to serve them all alike. So is the woodcutter common to all the trees. He overlooketh no tree, but heweth them all down." As may be expected, many various customs peculiar to different forests, yet sometimes similar, prevail among forest dwellers throughout the world, but only a few can be referred to here. I'm hearing lots of different birds, and there is a group of crows nearby. I can't see them, but I can hear them. Oh, I kind of see them now. They're far off. I love crows. Beautiful, beautiful crows. It's flying over me. Oh, I was going to try to show you. He was too fast. Hang on a second. I'm going to show you one of them. They're at the top of a tree. I see them. There he is. One of them. Beautiful crow. We see you, buddy. You're very beautiful. And he has some friends off in the forest there. They are very lovely. I have given a few crows around here food. They might be ones who know me. Distracted by the crows. Not distracted, really. Just, I love the crows. I had to pay them some attention. All right, where was I? All right, in the Nilgiri Mountains, M. Eli Recluse tells us, when a Toda woman has been pregnant for 7 months, she and her husband retire into the recesses of the forest where they select a certain tree. Beneath this tree, they light a lamp, and the wife then kneels and receives a tiny bow and arrows, which she places at the foot of the tree. After partaking of the evening meal, the two spend the night in the forest as if to place the child under the protection of the forest deities. As soon as the child is born, the father takes 3 leaves from the tree, twists them to form cups, and pours a little water into one. With this, he moistens his lips and pours the rest equally into the other 2 leaves. The mother drinks from one, and the infant is made to drink from the other. Thus, says M. Recluse, father, mother, and child, earliest of trinities, celebrate their first communion and drink the living water, more sacred than wine, from the leaves of the tree of life. Next morning, the mother and child take up their abode in a hut in the forest, where they remain until it is new moon, and this may be for a day or a month. The mother then goes home, and the father in turn repairs to the forest, where he remains during the duration of a moon. A Malayan tribe called the Arukans do not bury their dead in the earth, but carry the body into the forest, where they place it on the top of 4 wooden pillars, and a tree is planted near it. This tree is usually the Pavetta indica, and they have the curious custom of allowing none but naked females to be present at the planting of the tree. In one part of the island of Papao, when youths of marriageable age are engaged in making their drums, they are compelled to live alone in the forest and to observe certain rules. It was believed that if the youth ate a red banana, it would choke him, and the drum would give a dull, stifled sound. Or rather, a dull, stifled note. If he tasted grated coconut, the white ants, like the white particles of the nut, would gnaw the body of the drum. Other rules also required to be observed, as, if not, the drum would be a failure. In one of the ancient kingdoms of Ethiopia, lying south from Egypt, called Gingiro, there was usually great reluctance to assume the sovereignty over the tribe, and Dr. J. G. Fraser quotes from the travels of the Jesuits in Ethiopia, collected and historically digested by F. Balthazar Tallis, London, 1710, says the following: they wrap up the dead king's body in costly garments, and killing a cow, put it into the hide. Then all who hope to succeed him, being his sons or others of the royal blood, flying from the honor they covet, abscond and hide themselves in the woods. This done, the electors, who are all great sorcerers, agree among themselves who shall be king, and go out to seek him. When entering the woods by means of their enchantments, they say a large bird called Liber, as big as an eagle, comes down with mighty cries over the place where he is hid, and they find him encompassed by lions, tigers, snakes, and other creatures, gathered about him by witchcraft. The elect, as fierce as those beasts, rushes out upon those who seek him, wounding and sometimes killing some of them to prevent being seized. They take all in good part, defending themselves as the best they can till they have seized him. Thus, by carrying him away by force, he still struggling and seeming to refuse taking upon him the burden of government, all of which is mere cheat and hypocrisy. There is a custom among the natives of the forest of Urega, traversed by Stanley during his 2nd expedition into Africa, that when a man's wife dies, he puts a thick daub of charcoal paste over his face, which must be kept on for 2 years and a half. A woman who loses her husband does the same, and in addition wears bands of withered banana leaves around her forehead. On some parts of the West African coast, the king of the tribe is regarded as the divinity. He controls the weather and raises storms or allays them. He must live alone in the forest and must never lie down to sleep, because if he left his seat, the wind would not blow, and consequently navigation would cease. When the king of the Ho tribe in Togoland dies, it is considered necessary to bury him with the utmost secrecy so as to prevent his enemies from violating his grave and cutting off his head. To achieve the end in view, a false burial takes place with much ceremony in or near the king's house, while the real burial is performed by stealth in some secret spot in the forest. Only one of the king's daughters and a few trustworthy friends knowing where that spot is. Some other African tribes have the same practice. The island of Fernando Po in the Bight of Biafra is very densely wooded, and in some parts the natives have the curious custom of burying their dead in the forests with the heads just sticking up out of the ground. Many of the Indian tribes of North America believed that their medicine men were endowed with supernatural attributes, as it was not possible for all and sundry to obtain such a distinction. Far from it, anyone desirous of attaining that dignity had to receive tuition from the older adepts in the art, and also to undergo the most severe trials. These took place in the depths of the forest. The novice had to fast until he almost succumbed from starvation, and had to wound and otherwise torture himself in various ways. The effect of all this was to induce dreams in which spirits figured, and to cause him to believe that they gave him various messages. After passing all the tests successfully, he was initiated into the mysteries of the profession, and thus became a full-fledged medicine man. Some of the North American forests were often the scene of a race for a bride. The bride would ride into the forest, pursued by her suitors. The one who could capture her was the lucky one. Needless to say, she usually allowed herself to be caught by the favored one. Among certain of the Brazilian tribes, the belief is prevalent that moonlight is injurious to babies. Consequently, immediately after a baby is born, the mother retires with it into the thickest part of the forest, where the light of the moon cannot penetrate. So that was chapter 3 of Forest Folklore by Porteous. Yep, I am really enjoying this book. It is definitely one of my favorite books. And I am really enjoying going to the forest and reading out loud to the trees, to the plants, to the sky, to the earth, to the birds and the bunnies and the moose and lynx cats and coyotes and butterflies and whatever else is out here. It's a great day. Wow, look at that tree. It's really cool looking. So many different kinds of trees and plants. Beautiful sky. Lots of different butterflies and bees flittering around. Actually, it's some moths are what I have seen. I end up calling them all butterflies, but they are actually little moths around here. And they are all pretty. I've only caught a few of them on the camera. Yeah, this tree is quite nice. Pretty little leaves rustling. Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. All right. I will be reading more soon from another location.